Hello guys, and welcome back to another video. And I know it's been a solid week since I posted when this comes out, but I thought it would be a good idea with the trade deadline only 1 week away to look at 5 teams that I think could be the biggest buyers and biggest sellers potentially at the trade deadline. So obviously it's been pretty quiet headed into the deadline. I'm really hoping things just explode and there are a lot of trades at the trade deadline, but one can hope, right? One can only hope. But let's start off with the biggest buyer. A team that I think could be one of the biggest buyers at the deadline is the Boston Bruins. The Boston Bruins right now have a very good record of 36-18-5, which only gets them 4th in the Atlantic, still a playoff team. And really, this is a team that every year you have no idea how good they're going to be next year. With an aging core like Marchand and Bergeron, those two big players, you just never know when they're going to drop off and not be as good. So every year it's sort of just go for it. So I think this year's another year where Boston should really be all in, maybe try to make that last push for a deep playoff run, and I really think they need to improve their forward depth. Their forward depth is not very good, and to improve that forward depth, I would get a second-line center. Eric Holla is right now their second-line center, and I just don't see him being the second-line center, really. I don't think he's good enough to be. I think he's a good third-line center, but not quite a second-line center. Players I could see in Boston going out and getting at the trade deadline are Claude Giroux, Tomas Hertl, all centermen, or centerman from Winnipeg, Paul Stastny. Now, I don't think Paul Stastny should be their first option. I think that's if everything else doesn't work. I really think they should go all in and get either Claude Giroux or Tomas Hertl to really try and help them go deep in this playoff run. But now moving on to a team that I could see being a big seller, and that team is the Arizona Coyotes. The Arizona Coyotes right now have pretty much the flipped record of the Boston Bruins. They are right now 18th, 36-4, which leads them to last place in the Central. Arizona this year, they're obviously having a not good season. That was expected of them. They're in the middle of a rebuild, and I think they have to get as many draft picks as possible. And this is a team that has some assets that they can get first-round picks for. These assets that I could see them selling at the deadline include Phil Kessel, who you could probably definitely get a first for. A very good player. He's definitely not going to be part of their core in the future, and I think if you're Arizona, you have to sell him off. Nick Ritchie, which is odd because they just got him for Toronto, so they could flip him and get more back, and then that wouldn't look good on Toronto. But Ritchie's been playing really good since he's got to Arizona, and they could definitely flip him and try to get something good for him. Karel Vejmelka is another player I could see them selling. With the lack of goalies in the market right now, you could actually get a decent return for Vejmelka, I think. So Vejmelka, I could definitely see him on the block. Galchenyuk is another centerman I could see, and left defenseman Jacob Chychrun. Now the problem with Jacob Chychrun is he's just hurt himself. I think it was a lower body injury, maybe. I think it was a lower body injury, but anyway, Chychrun's just got hurt, so he's going to be out for a bit, and that might hurt his value at the deadline. So maybe it might be best for them to wait till the draft to trade him, but he's definitely still a possibility of being traded. But yeah, Arizona, definitely a team that needs to be sellers because, you know, they need as many draft picks as they can possibly be. They could be good in 3 to 4 years from now, but right now, definitely need to sell a couple of these guys off at least and get some first rounders. But now moving on to another team that I think could be big buyers at this trade deadline, and the next team is the Colorado Avalanche. The Avalanche right now have a record of 42-13-5, so very good record, and that brings them to 1st in the Central. So again, having a very good season, and that just speaks to the fact that they have to go for it this year. The last few years they've been out in the second round, and this year you have to make it past that second round. With a team this good, you can't be out in the first 2 rounds again. They can't. So if I'm Colorado, I'm going in. I'm trying to get a forward. I feel like their forward depth could be improved a little bit. Although they're one of the best offensive teams in the league, it's funny that I can say that their forward depth could probably still be improved. And I think they should get preferably a second-line left winger. Because their left wing right now, their second-line left wing is Alex Newhook, who, don't get me wrong, pretty good, but just not quite that second-line level, I think. And I think they could add to that. So players that I could see them getting, oh yeah, they have a deadline cap of $3.9 million, so they could do something with that a little bit. They can afford a pretty expensive player, especially at half price. But players I could see them getting this deadline are left winger Max Domi, Domi having a pretty solid season in Columbus, centerman Hertl, and centerman Claude Giroux. So 2 centermen. Centermen can usually play the wing if they need to. Boston, again, also needs depth. So players are pretty similar overall. But Colorado, I think if they want to really make a push, they have to improve that forward depth a little bit. Their goaltending with Darcy Kemper has been very good lately, and Francouz has played good, and then their defense is very good. Although they've allowed some goals, I still think that they need to have better forward depth headed into the playoffs to really get that push going. But moving on to the next team that I think could be pretty big sellers at this deadline, and this is a team that has changed over the last couple of weeks. That earlier, if you asked me, I would have said no, they probably won't sell much. But now, it's really changed, and that is the Detroit Red Wings. The Detroit Red Wings have a record of 24, 28, and 7 for 5th in the Atlantic, and it's funny that that's 5th in the Atlantic because, man, the East is just top and bottom like that. It's insane. But 5th in the Atlantic, in Detroit, they have slid recently. A lot of stuff has slid, and I think they need another year of just retooling, selling off stuff before they really make that push next season. They got a few guys who probably won't be part of their future core who I would sell off if I was Yzerman, even though the Yzer plan's going well right now. Not quite complete. And yeah, I think I'd sell off some guys and really get just as many assets as possible before you make that push to the playoffs. Players that I could see them selling are left defenseman Nick Leddy, who has not had a great season this year, but you could probably still get something back from him. Centerman Nemestikov, maybe they re-sign Nemestikov, I could see it, but also he's having a good year, and I think his value is higher than it ever has been. Sam Gagner, a pretty good third, fourth line guy. And then Thomas Greiss, again, lack of goaltending market, you might be able to get something back. Even though he's having a rough season, it has been a little bit better lately. He's been outplaying Nedeljkovic, who also hasn't been playing good, but Thomas Greiss, he's a guy who you could maybe get a return for. So once again, I'm selling guys from Detroit who aren't going to be part of their future core, or even just future very much. But moving on to the next big buyer, and that is the Minnesota Wild. Now, the Minnesota Wild have a record of 34, 20, and 4. Pretty good, and they're third in the Central. But they've been sliding recently. Their goals for is very good, but their goals against has dropped very low. Their goaltending has been very subpar. Their defense has been very subpar. Hence why I think Minnesota, with the buyout cap that they have, because they bought out those guys last year, going up, they need to go for it this year and get a rental and try to push for the playoffs. And I think they either go for a goalie or a defenseman. Obviously, with that goals against sliding so much, you just have to change something up in that back end to fix that goals against and get back to where they were earlier in the season. So players I could see them going for with a $12.5 million deadline cap, so they can really do a lot with that money. I could see them going for goaltender Marc-Andre Fleury. I could see them going for goaltender Braden Holtby. Those are the two goalies that I think they would most likely go for because they don't want to risk it. You're probably not going for like a Karel Vejmelka if you're Minnesota. You want to go with an established goalie who you know will at least give you some solid goaltending. Or I could see them going for a couple of defensemen. Maybe they go for a defenseman Hampus Lindholm or right defenseman John Klingberg. The only thing with Klingberg is that I think Dallas is going to want an NHL level defenseman back if they trade him. So really, I don't know if that's something Minnesota would be interested in, but they really need to switch something up on that back end because, man, I've been seeing a lot of games where they're allowing like 6 or 7 goals, and they need to switch it up before they fall out of that playoff race, especially, again, with that buyout cap going up next season because they bought out Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. So, Ryan Suter, I think. But, yeah, they need to do something about that this season. But now moving on to another big seller. This is the third big seller I have out of 5, and that is the Philadelphia Flyers. A pretty obvious one. They're 18, 30, and 11 right now. A lot of overtime losses. They make their record look a bit better than it actually is, and that's kind of sad because their record already looks pretty poor. And they're 8th in the Metro right now. This season, they have really been below expectations. They had that whole pattern in and out of the playoffs going, and that finally ends this season, which I predicted it to in my season predictions. But it has happened. They just haven't been great, and man, that Ristolainen contract's too much, but we'll get into that later. But Philadelphia this season, I think they need to make some big moves, and I know the GM does not want to start rebuilding, but I think their hand's been forced a little bit, and they're going to have to make, with expiring contracts, they're going to have to make some sales this trade deadline. Starting off with the biggest one, I think they will be selling centerman Claude Giroux, who I don't think they want to sell, but I can't see Claude Giroux staying unless he just feels secure there. But like I feel like if you're Claude Giroux, you want to win, and I just don't see Philadelphia being that team right now. So Claude Giroux is one. Centerman Derek Brassard, who's having a pretty good season, could get them something. Right defenseman Justin Braun could get them a good return. Not like a solid, like a first round or anything, but something solid. Or maybe even left defenseman Keith Yandel. I know his defenseman is rough, but if a team is looking for a bit of more of an offensive defenseman, then I think Keith Yandel could possibly be that guy. So Philadelphia, definitely a team I see needing to start a retool. Sort of like the next team I have on my sellers list. So a couple of teams pretty similar here, but yeah, Philadelphia, got to do something about that. And now to another buyer, another one of my biggest buyers, and that is the New York Rangers. The New York Rangers right now have a record of 37, 17, and 5, which gets them 3rd in the Metro. So they're fighting it out right now with Pittsburgh for those 2nd and 3 spots. They're losing that battle a little bit as of recently. But they have $31.1 million in deadline cap space. So they really can spend a ton of money if they want to. And they have so much cap space, it's insane. They could pick up a rental. They could pick up a guy who goes on for a few years. Doesn't matter because they have so much cap space. And, like, their defense, I don't think they're going to get a defense or goalie. Obviously not a goalie when you got Igor Shesterkin. And Georgiev as a backup, I think, is fine. I think he'll pick it up a bit. But defense, again, their defense has been solid as well as Igor Shesterkin, like I said. But their defense, again, pretty solid. I think they need some more depth scoring. It feels like every single goal scored by the Rangers from the same 4 players. So the Rangers players, I could see them going out and getting. I think they need a right winger. So I've said they could go out and get Rickard Rakell, Brock Besser, Connor Garland are a few players. Brock Besser, obviously, an RFA next year, but I'm sure New York Rangers could work out something with him. Connor Garland, if Vancouver is still willing to give him up, if they fall off a little bit before the deadline, maybe Vancouver will be willing to give him up. And Rickard Rakell, pretty solid. And then maybe even going for centerman Claude Giroux. That's an expensive one, but who knows? JT Miller probably would have been on this list, but with Vancouver doing as well as they are, I just don't see that. Claude Giroux shoots right, therefore he could probably play on that right side if the Rangers need him to. But yeah, I just think the Rangers really need to add another top 6 forward to really possibly make that push for the playoffs and not depend as much on Igor Shesterkin saving them every single game with his amazing goaltending. So that's what I think they need. But now moving on to another big seller, and a seller that I said was like Philadelphia in the way that I don't think the GM wants to rebuild or the players do, but sometimes it has to happen, and that is the San Jose Sharks. The San Jose Sharks right now are 26, 25, and 7 for 7th in the Pacific Division. And this year, they're just mediocre, not playing great. I will give it to them. They're doing a bit better than I thought. But again, not a playoff team. So this is a team that does need to start a rebuild. And I think they already have, but they just won't admit that they're doing it. And the players don't want it, all that. But they have some big moves to make this offseason and a couple of sales they have to make. And those people that I think they'll sell at the deadline include centerman Tomas Hertl, the obvious one. They could get a huge return for Hertl, and I think you take that if you're them. Don't risk the whole... I don't think that you risk him leaving in the offseason and you getting nothing. I think you have to trade him out. And then Barabanov. Alexander Barabanov has been great this season, and I don't know if he'll be able to recreate what he's done this season, so if I'm San Jose, I might be selling him and trying to get something for him while you can. And maybe centerman Nick Bonino. Nick Bonino having a bit of a rough year, but still on a cheap contract. You could probably give him up for half price and get some assets back. So those are some players that I could see San Jose selling. But now moving on to the next big buyer, and that I see, yes, being the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, Toronto Maple Leafs overall record is 37-17-5, and that gets them 3rd in the Atlantic. They're in a dogfight for like 3rd in the Atlantic, though. That 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, all very close. But their deadline cap space is $3.7 million right now, so they can't afford a bit because with Jake Muzzin getting hurt, they are able to get another defenseman or goalie, and they need one. Their defense and goaltending, especially goaltending, has slid so much recently, it's insane. Jack Campbell, who was having a Vezina-level caliber first half of the season, has completely fallen off. Peter Mrazek just does not look good the whole season, and they need a goalie or a defenseman because it really depends on what Jack Campbell does. But the thing is, now Jack Campbell's hurt, so that just puts Dubas in a really difficult position. So I've gone with, I could see them going either way with this. I could see them getting a defenseman or a goalie. They could use either of them, but it has to be a rental. Toronto is really tight to the cap, and they cannot afford to take a player who's going to be a multiple-year contract. So players that I could see them getting, again, with the goalies, just like Minnesota, could be Marc-Andre Fleury or Braden Holtby, established goalies, again, with Minnesota not taking a risk on a goalie like Vmelka, I don't know, who's another guy that could be out there. Thomas Greiss. Probably not going to take a risk on a guy like Thomas Greiss, who hasn't had a great season. I think they go with an established goalie like Marc-Andre Fleury or Braden Holtby. And another thing similar to Minnesota, maybe they go for a defenseman, John Klingberg. The same sort of strings attached with, I don't know if Toronto will be willing to give up a defenseman for a defenseman like that, because Dallas is probably going to want an NHL caliber player. But another guy I could see them going for is maybe Mark Giordano, who at half retained, they could probably afford with that deadline cap space. Good leader. He's a pretty solid offensive defenseman. Puts up some decent offensive numbers, and he's pretty fine defensively. So those are a couple guys I think they could go with to help themselves with their desperate need of a goaltender or defenseman, just something to stop that goals against. Man, Buffalo scored 5 goals on you the other day. I love Buffalo, second favorite team. Not Vancouver's not number 1. They're okay. I like Edmonton though. Anyway, and the last big seller I have on this list, and they're not really a big seller, they're just a team, because there's not a lot of things going on this deadline. So really, Winnipeg does manage to make the list. Right now they're 27, 23, and 10, which is not a bad record, but they've just been mediocre all year. And Winnipeg, I think it's just a situation of you don't know if these guys are going to stay, so unless you can really work out a deal with them, I think it's time for them to go. So I think Winnipeg will end up selling centerman Paul Stastny and centerman Andrew Kopp. That's it, really. Those two guys are UFAs who can get you some stuff back. And Winnipeg, really what I think you do is you sell these guys off, you take this season as a one-off, and you try to retool a little bit in the offseason and go for it next year. I don't think Cheveldayoff should be fired. I think on paper this team looks really good, but Hellebuck's not having a great year. A few guys aren't on Winnipeg. And really, mainly Hellebuck, but really I think they need just a little bit of a reset. And with Paul Stastny and Andrew Kopp's UFA status, you don't know if they're going to re-sign. And I think they sell both of these guys off at the deadline. But yeah, thank you for watching if you made it through this whole video. It's been a while since I've recorded. I actually got my braces taken off today. You see, look at those nice teeth right there. I don't know, they're okay. But no, the braces are gone. I have a retainer down here. So sorry if I'm like slurring words a little bit. It feels a little weird, and I've been just like feeling a little weird with that today. But thank you guys for watching. If you are still here, please like and subscribe if you can. I would appreciate it. And I will hopefully see you guys in the next video. See ya. Get off the hat. Oh yeah, I got a haircut today as well. Oh. Alright, this is taking a while. I'm trying to take off the mic, but I'm really struggling. There we go.